You don't notice it at first because in the beginning, it never feels like resentment. It feels like connection. It feels like you finally met someone who sees you, who appreciates your depth, who feels safe around your presence. They listen to you. They open up to you. They tell you things they don't tell anyone else. And for a moment, it feels real. But then something subtle begins to shift, not loud enough to confront, not obvious enough to explain. Just small changes, a tone that feels slightly off, a comment that carries a strange edge, a reaction that doesn't match the moment, and you feel it. You always feel it. But you don't trust it, not immediately, because you're not someone who jumps to conclusions. You're someone who understands. So instead of questioning them, you question yourself. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe they're just going through something. And just like that, you stay open, you stay kind, you stay patient. Even when something inside you starts tightening, quietly stay with me, because this part matters, because what you're feeling in those moments is real. You're not imagining it. You're sensing something most people don't have the awareness to detect. But here's what most people never realize. Empaths don't just attract love. They attract projection. They attract unresolved emotions. They attract unhealed insecurities. They attract people who feel something in your presence that they don't fully understand. And that something isn't always admiration. Sometimes it's discomfort. And this is where everything begins. At your core, you carry a kind of light. Not the kind that demands attention, not the kind that tries to prove anything, but a quiet, grounded presence that makes people feel seen. And when someone who is disconnected from themselves comes into contact with that kind of presence, it does something to them. It exposes them, not intentionally, not aggressively, but naturally, because your awareness highlights what they've been avoiding. Your emotional depth reflects their emotional gaps. Your authenticity challenges the masks they've been wearing. And at first, they're drawn to it because it feels different. It feels safe. It feels real. It feels like something they've been missing. But over time, that same light begins to do something else. It starts to make them uncomfortable. And this is where the confusion begins. Because now the same qualities they once admired in you start triggering something inside them. And they don't understand why, so they don't say it directly. They express it indirectly through subtle tension, through passive comments, through emotional distance that slowly grows over time, and you feel it. But instead of recognizing it for what it is, you try to fix it. You try to be more understanding, more patient, more accommodating. You dim parts of yourself just to make the connection feel stable again. And this is where everything quietly starts to fall apart, because the truth is you were never the problem. But you became the place where their internal conflict surfaced. And instead of facing it, they unconsciously started resisting you, not because you did something wrong, but because your presence started revealing something they weren't ready to confront. And this is the part that hurts the most, because you gave them safety. You gave them understanding. You gave them a space where they could be seen without judgment. And somehow that still turned into tension. But here's what most people never realize. Not everyone is comfortable being seen. Some people only feel safe when they can hide. And when they can't hide around you, they don't always appreciate that. Sometimes they resent it quickly, subtly, but deeply. And this is where your internal struggle begins. Because now you're caught between what you feel and what you want to believe. You feel the shift. You sense the distance. You notice the small changes that don't quite make sense. But you also remember how it started, how genuine it felt, how connected it seemed, how much potential you believed was there. So you stay, you try to understand, you try to give it time, you try to adjust yourself just enough to bring things back to how they were. But here's where everything shifts. You can't return to something that was never stable to begin with, because what felt like connection was partly projection. They weren't just seeing you, they were seeing what you represented to them: peace, clarity, emotional depth, things they admired but didn't fully embody. And over time, admiration without alignment turns into tension, and tension, when left unspoken, turns into resentment. Stay with me, because this is where it gets deeper. Because the resentment isn't always obvious. It doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like subtle disrespect, like not fully listening when you speak, like dismissing your feelings in small, indirect ways, like making you feel like you're too much without ever saying it directly. And because it's not clear, you don't confront it. You absorb it, you internalize it, you start adjusting parts of yourself without even realizing it, becoming slightly quieter, slightly less expressive, slightly more careful about how much of yourself you reveal. And this is the part most people don't talk about, the slow dimming, not because you lost your light, but because you tried to make it easier for someone else to be around it. And this is where everything begins to change, because eventually something inside you starts to push back. A quiet awareness, a subtle discomfort that doesn't go away anymore, a realization that no matter how much you adjust, something still feels off. And that's because the issue was never your intensity. It was their inability to sit with it. Because now we move into the part most people never fully understand. This isn't just about what happens on the surface. This is about the deeper mechanics, the quiet psychological patterns, the invisible dynamics that explain why this keeps happening to you. And once you see this clearly, you won't be able to unsee it. The first reason empaths attract people who secretly resent their light is because your presence creates a mirror. Not the kind people consciously look into, but the kind they feel. When someone stands in front of you, truly stands in your presence, they don't just experience who you are. They experience who they are in contrast to you. Your emotional awareness highlights their emotional avoidance. Your honesty reflects their hidden contradictions. Your depth exposes the surface they've been living on. And at first, this feels intriguing to them, even comforting, because it gives them access to something they don't usually feel. But here's what most people never realize. A mirror doesn't just show beauty, it shows everything. And when someone isn't ready to face what they see, they don't blame the reflection. They blame the mirror. And this is where everything shifts, because instead of appreciating your presence, they begin to feel unsettled by it, not consciously, not intentionally. But internally, they start to feel less than, without understanding why. They start to feel exposed without knowing what exactly is being revealed. And because they can't articulate it, they resist it subtly through small behaviors that don't make sense at first, a dismissive tone, a lack of appreciation, quiet withdrawal of warmth. And you feel it, but you don't label it as resentment. You label it as confusion, and that confusion keeps you there longer than you should be. And this leads to the second reason empaths attract people who are drawn to light, but not willing to grow. This is where the dynamic becomes complicated, because these people don't hate your light. They need it. They're drawn to it because it gives them something they lack: clarity, stability, emotional safety. Being around you makes them feel more grounded, more understood, more whole. But here's the problem. They want the feeling without doing the work required to sustain it. And this is where the tension begins, because your presence invites growth naturally, without forcing it, without demanding it. Just by being who you are, you create an environment where growth becomes necessary. And for someone who isn't ready for that, it feels like pressure, even if you never intended it to. And this is where everything starts to distort, because now, instead of seeing you as a source of safety, they begin to see you as a source of discomfort. Not because you changed, but because your presence challenges their comfort zone. And when someone values comfort over growth, they don't rise to meet your light. They try to bring it down to a level they can tolerate, sometimes through subtle criticism, sometimes through emotional inconsistency, sometimes through making you feel like you're asking for too much when you're simply being yourself. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin to resent the very thing that once attracted them to you. Stay with me, because this is where it goes deeper. The third reason empaths attract hidden resentment is because you give without demanding. And on the surface, this looks like a strength, and it is. But in certain dynamics, it creates imbalance, because when you give freely without clear boundaries, you unintentionally teach people that your energy is always available, that your understanding is endless, that your patience has no limit. And at first, they appreciate this. They feel lucky to have someone like you. Over time, something subtle happens. What was once appreciated becomes expected, and what becomes expected loses its value. And this is where everything shifts again. Because now, instead of recognizing what you give, they start taking it for granted. And when you finally begin to pull back, when you start needing space or expressing your own needs, it disrupts the dynamic they've grown comfortable in. And instead of adjusting themselves, they feel challenged, even threatened, because now They have to show up in ways they didn't have to before. And if they're not capable of that, they don't say it directly. They express it through resistance, through subtle irritation, through emotional distance, through behaviors that make you feel like you've changed when in reality, you've just stopped overgiving. And this is where resentment quietly builds, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped making things easy for them. And this brings us to the fourth reason: empaths attract people who confuse your light with weakness. This is one of the most painful dynamics to experience because your kindness, your patience, your emotional openness is not weakness, it's strength, but not everyone sees it that way. Some people interpret your softness as something they can control, something they can test, something they don't have to fully respect. And at first, you don't notice it because it doesn't come in obvious forms. It comes in small boundary crossings, small moments of disregard, small actions that feel slightly off, but not enough to confront. And because you tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, you let it slide. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. But here's what most people never realize. Every unaddressed boundary becomes an invitation for more. And over time, those small moments accumulate until one day you realize something doesn't feel right anymore, that you're being treated in a way that doesn't match the respect you give. And when you finally begin to pull your energy back, when you stop tolerating what you once ignored, it disrupts their perception of you because now you're no longer the version of yourself they felt comfortable controlling. And instead of adjusting their behavior, they feel challenged by your shift. And that challenge turns into resentment. Stay with me because this last part is the deepest. The fifth reason empaths attract hidden resentment is because your light reminds people of who they are not being. This is the one that changes everything when you truly understand it, because it has nothing to do with what you do and everything to do with what you represent. When you live with awareness, when you value emotional truth, when you strive for depth and authenticity, you naturally become a reference point, not by trying, but by existing. And for someone who is disconnected from those qualities, your presence becomes a silent reminder, a reminder of the parts of themselves they've ignored, the growth they've avoided, truth they've been running from. And that reminder is uncomfortable because it creates internal conflict. They see something in you that they know exists within them, but they're not living it. And instead of facing that gap, they project it. They project their frustration, their insecurity, their discomfort, and it comes out as subtle resentment, not loud enough to confront, but strong enough to feel. And you feel it, even when they don't say a word. And this is where everything comes together because now you start to understand something deeper. It was never just about the connection. It was about the dynamic, the unseen forces that were shaping how they responded to you. And once you see this clearly, something inside you begins to shift. You stop taking it personally. You stop questioning your worth. You stop wondering if you're too much because you realize you were never too much. You were just reflecting something they weren't ready to face. Now stay with me because this is the turning point, because understanding this isn't enough. You have to integrate it. And integration begins with a simple but powerful shift. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable, not aggressively, not defensively, but consciously. You allow yourself to be seen fully without shrinking, without filtering your depth, without apologizing for your awareness. And here's what happens when you do that. The people who were secretly resisting you fall away, not because you push them out, but because they can no longer exist in a space where they have to face themselves. And the people who are aligned with you stay, not because they need your light, but because they respect it, they meet it, they grow with it, they don't feel threatened by it. And that's the difference. Because the goal was never to be accepted by everyone. The goal was to be aligned with the right ones. And alignment requires clarity, clarity about who you are, clarity about who can truly meet you there. So if you've ever felt like people were drawn to you and then slowly pulled away, if you've ever sensed a shift you couldn't fully explain, if you've ever felt like your presence created something in others that turned into distance or tension, now you understand why. It wasn't random. It wasn't your fault. And it wasn't something you needed to fix. It was something you needed to see because your light was never the problem. It was the mirror. And not everyone is ready to look into it. And once you truly understand that, you stop trying to be easier to handle, you stop trying to be less intense. You stop trying to adjust yourself just to maintain connections that were never stable to begin with. Instead, you become still grounded, clear, and you let people reveal whether they can stand in your presence without shrinking from themselves, because the right ones won't resent your light. They'll recognize it. And more importantly, they won't feel threatened by it. They'll feel called to rise with it. And that's how you know, not by what they say, but by how they respond to who you are when you're not holding anything back. So the next time you feel that subtle shift, that quiet tension, that unspoken distance, you won't ignore it. You won't overanalyze it. And you definitely won't blame yourself for it. You'll understand it calmly, clearly. And that understanding will give you something most people never develop: discernment, the ability to feel what's real without needing it to be explained. And once you have that, you stop chasing connection. You start choosing alignment, because not everyone who is drawn to your light is meant to stay in it. And the moment you accept that, everything changes quickly, but permanently, because your light isn't something to hide. It's something to protect. And not everyone deserves access to it.